the immigration clash that continues after Donald Trump's loss at the Supreme Court. Now, the judge in that case is pushing the administration to carry out what is basically the Supreme Court's order to return this man who was mistakenly sent to El Salvador. A point that, as I've told you before, if you've followed the story, is not in dispute. The administration admits that this mistake was made. They admit this was an error, but they haven't yet done anything that we know of publicly to rectify it and have claimed the opposite, that they can't fix it. Now, Donald Trump is basically using this case, which does boil down to one person, to test whether he can defy the high court. Can he drive through the loophole that Chief Justice Roberts left in the way he wrote this order? And will there be consequences? Because the Supreme Court has basically upheld the lower court loss. There are some details there I've mentioned. We'll return to them tonight. But in essence, everyone understands that who's looked at this. The lower court judge ruled against the Trump administration and said that the administration must facilitate this detainee's return from the erroneous location they sent him. Now, there's a new hearing today. That same judge had strong words for Trump's DOJ attorney, saying there'll be no tolerance for gamesmanship or grandstanding here. And so we are in this moment that if you follow these type of things, you say, okay, you remember how it used to be. Even administrations that took large views of presidential power, like Reagan or Bush, would regularly comply with these orders. Indeed, that was an era where we didn't live with the kind of questions we have today. The question today is, what next? If the administration is testing how far it can defy or flout the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, with several judges appointed by Trump on that, several Supreme Court justices from Trump's term, as well as others, if they can define that, well, what's going to happen day to day at the lower court level? Well, tonight we have some answers on that. And while they might not be all that encouraging for an overnight solution to this problem, it does show you how this is all going to play out. And some of this is, as you've probably heard, uncharted territory. How do you deal with an administration that tests everything and often does so in what many lawyers allege and sometimes evidence shows is dishonest or bad faith? Well, first, the news tonight is this judge is now fast-tracking a probe into whether the DOJ lied and defied in the lead-up to this standoff. Now, you can come to your own conclusions about that. We've covered when the planes took off. You've heard Donald Trump himself and Stephen Miller and others talk openly about what sounds like defying the court. But that is different from how a legal process investigates and then ultimately makes conclusions about something. So whatever one thinks, whether it's likely or not that they were dishonest, now there will be what they call expedited discovery, a fast track of depositions of government officials and others to get to the bottom of this. The judge telling those involved to cancel any vacations and be ready to do this fast. Now, what if people who work for Trump follow his lead and basically try to defy those requests? We've seen this before, especially in the first term. There were people who thought they could get away with what Trump could get away with, and they forgot they weren't president or former president. They weren't as powerful, and they got in a lot of trouble. Some of them went to prison, you may recall. So some of the system does still hold or is supposed to, and there are sanctions available even against current government officials. It could be monetary, could be disciplinary, like their professional status or whether lawyers are allowed to argue in court or keep their bar licenses. It could also potentially eventually lead to jail time, depending on the type of contempt that a judge uses. And this judge is citing exactly those examples today, not saying we're there yet, but weighing possible contempt proceedings against the Trump administration. The judge wants frequent updates on the progress here, and some of those have been lacking. The DOJ continues to echo basically Trump's dodge, putting all this on El Salvador, saying they're only prepared to facilitate Garcia's presence in the U.S. if he shows up, if he presents at a port of entry. This would be, I guess, the hypothetical prison break scenario where Garcia gets out of El Salvadorian's prison and then makes it to a port of the U.S., which is a country where he's having trouble staying. Very unlikely that would happen, even if he somehow got out of the prison. In that case, though, the U.S. would then, the Trump officials say, have him removed to a third country or seek to end what is his current protected status, meaning he's protected from being sent to El Salvador. That was the whole legal issue. They're saying in that case, they would just send him back down there. Now, if that sounds like a bit of legal mumbo jumbo, let's not forget there is a person involved in all this who has a family and a heck of a lot more people and families who will be affected depending on whether they get away with this. With that in mind, again, I've tried to show you the evidence and the facts. I'm showing you what the Trump side says, but let's remember this person and his family. We also want to show you, as part of our reporting, what his wife said today.
find myself pleading with the Trump administration and the Bukele administration to stop playing political games with the life of Kilmer. We will continue standing strong, and we will never give up on you, Kilmer.
That is her view and her plea in what is obviously a difficult situation where, by all accounts, as much we can tell, you have an individual person in the wrong prison, their family suffering and wondering what will happen, and two powerful countries, as she put it, playing games about this person's life. Now, we don't have any evidence that the United States has even requested, say in a phone call or an email, that El Salvador just release Garcia. Wouldn't even have to be at the presidential level of that meeting yesterday, but there's no evidence, as you see here in the filing, that anyone's requested his release. The playbook was blunt at the White House yesterday. El Salvador's president followed Trump's lead, basically playing this game of the catch-22, and we have no power, and we haven't really talked about it, and we can't do it, claiming he couldn't release this individual back to the U.S., who he just got from the U.S. The Attorney General under Trump says they're not going to do it.
What they also said is just facilitate, meaning if he wanted a plane flight, we could give him a plane flight. But we cannot effectuate it, meaning making it happen. President Bukele does not want to give him back to the United States, nor do we want him back.
Right, so that's it.
Now, in fairness to the Attorney General, she is lawyering. She's the top lawyer in the Justice Department, right? She's taking that word that we've now heard so much about since this story broke, facilitate, and giving it her reading, which is the minimum least possible, right? That's their position. And so while it might be a stretch, I showed you the evidence that some people allege there's been bad faith. That itself is under investigation. We are now at the point where this is up to the Supreme Court. If facilitate means do it or try to do it or at least go on record requesting it, well, these are all lawyers. I know some lawyers. I'm a lawyer. You can just deal with that and say, if there were any doubt on the next appeal, because his lawyers can say they have not facilitated it, and that can become another issue on appeal. If he's stuck in the prison, you say facilitate meant try, and at least show on record that you requested and you did not. You are now in breach. You must comply. And we have legal protocols for the passage of individuals between countries, right? This is not a first-time thing. We have extradition for defendants or detainees, even if they might be dangerous or alleged to be so. If they wanted to do this, they could. Now, that case is about one person, as I mentioned, but the precedents will test broader powers in the second Trump era. And everybody knows that. If you follow the news and you're hearing my voice, watching it or hearing it somewhere, you must follow some news. You might recall cases that take many, many months, sometimes over a year, from when the conflict starts to when they reach the Supreme Court. You notice this one got right to the high court, and they unanimously ruled against Trump. Why is that? In this case, the answer is simple. Because everybody gets that these are big, important cases, not because one person will matter in some grand way for years for the national security of the United States, but because these are where the lines will be drawn. And we're seeing the administration try to push past the lines in other detainee cases. Take this Columbia student, Mohsen Madawi, detained by officials in an immigration office in Vermont. Now, his lawyer says he was there actually doing the right thing under law. We hear a lot about how immigrants are supposed to comply, that he showed up there voluntarily, according to the lawyer, and we have evidence of that in the sense that we can see him leaving there. And it was at a site where they were supposed to do a naturalization interview, the final step in pursuing citizenship. But instead, you see him held and walked out, I meant to say, arrested and handcuffed before being removed. The government is not commenting on this yet. We do know that he was part of public pro-Palestinian protests. That's the kind of free speech that every resident of the U.S. can partake in. Citizen or not, by the way, if you're here, you are afforded certain rights, and you have the right to free speech. And recall, it was Trump and his allies like Elon Musk who claimed they were campaigning to protect free speech, be it literally vis-a-vis the government or in a broader sense online. Remember hearing all about that? Well, whatever happens in this case, it's clear there's a lack of respect for free speech that opposes some of their positions. There's also a report in the Trump administration knew in advance that a tough student they detained, Rumaisi Ozturk, in this controversial video taken off the street by ICE agents, she's now in custody in Louisiana. But the Washington Post reports there were no ties to terrorism found, despite the administration claiming the opposite, and it was known, the Post report says, before her arrest. with the determination that, quote, the Trump administration had not produced any evidence showing she engaged in not only anti-Semitic activities, which is related to speech, or like I said, hate speech, or made a public statement supporting a terrorist organization, which could cross over into the kind of legal issues that actually do potentially support removal. The Atlantic says we are seeing, quote, this week, obvious contempt for the Supreme Court and the rule of law. DOJ veteran Andrew Weissmann told us last night these immigration cases are showing that the constitutional crisis is here now, he said. Not a close call, not a looming threat, not a what if we get a ruling and they ignore it, but Weissmann saying the crisis is here because they have the ruling and they are ignoring it. The only nuance, if you want to give it that, is what I mentioned last night and what we reported the night this case came down. It didn't land as a clear return the guy, right? It landed as facilitate the thing with due deference to the president's powers as commander-in-chief over immigration and foreign policy. So, yes, normal historical administrations comply with this kind of stuff, but you know who we're dealing with here. And so the next move, whether we have a crisis or not, I've shown you different people's views of whether we're at a 7 or a 9 or a 10 is, what will the Supreme Court do? Because what I can tell you with all fairness and evidence is this administration ain't facilitating anything as suggested in that ruling.